Hello, Humane Marketers. Sarah Znakrocha here. Welcome to another episode of the Humane Marketing Podcast, a place to be for the generation of marketers who cares. This is the show where we talk about marketing your business in a way that feels good to you, is aligned with your values, and also resonates more with your conscious customers because it's not pushy, ethical, and also beautiful. So if you're a regular here, you know that I'm organizing the conversations around the 7 Ps of humane marketing. And if you're new here and this is your first time, welcome. I'm so excited you're here. You may want to download your one-page marketing plan with the 7 Ps of humane marketing in the form of a mandala at humane.marketing/one page, the number 1 and page. So again, humane.marketing/one page. And with that, with no further ado, let's dive into today's conversation. Hey, Kayleigh, so good to speak to you. Again, we have the opportunity and chance and luck to be able to speak twice in like a week or 10 days.
Yeah.
Your podcast, now you're here. So excited to have you.
I feel so lucky that our paths have crossed and that we've had this opportunity to go deeper. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, you said it all there. Deep is the motto, especially with the kind of title that we gave this episode. And so, yeah, we're going to dive right in. I think you are obsessed with the truth, and I think you're not alone. It's a very timely subject, definitely something that we talk about here on the podcast all the time regarding, marketing. But I'm curious, I'd like to kind of start with your story and how you came to find your truth, or please tell us the story. I don't know if you found it, but I have a feeling you have.
As I was reflecting on this search for the truth, like I was brought back to childhood, where I do feel like we are more closely connected to at least our own personal truth at such a young age. And it makes sense because we're actually more in tune with our bodies and our emotions. We let ourselves have them. And for all those reasons, it's like our senses are really, really open before we start to see, okay, what's acceptable, what's expected, and kind of start that conforming process that happens for a lot of people, and certainly happened to me. So for me, my journey has really been like reaccessing that truth that is within. And when I think of like 6-year-old Kayleigh, she's this girl that's like standing with her arms to the side like this, with a sweatshirt with ballerina slippers on it and a scrunchie and a troll hanging out of her pocket with blue hair and like a huge smile. And like this very creative, but independent and curious and actually very spiritual nature, like early on, just being very tapped in to, at least for me right back then, what like faith. And so I have this picture that my grandma sent me, that image that I just shared with you. And I'm like, okay, like there's so much truth there. And then I went on the journey that, a lot of my peers went on, where it's like, okay, then you go to school, then you realize like, okay, this is about achievement and doing things correctly. And I was also game for that journey. I am the oldest of 4 kids. It very much was like a go, 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 achievement oriented environment. And I also thrived in that. So I sought the accolades. I, went to the good high school and university and got the job and did all those things that we do, which I wouldn't say diverted me from my truth, but it made clear to me that I had lost a piece of it along the way. Mm-hmm. And so there were just 3 moments: one, getting sober at 25 and realizing we're all on this recovery journey. And for me, not expressing and not sharing and withholding was really at the core of that. I later went on a retreat a few years after and had my first experience of being embodied. And that's where you're like, oh, we're spiritual beings, but like we're also having this physical experience, and there's all this intelligence there. And then in this personal truth journey, like more recently doing some work really around intimacy and what does it mean to see yourself first so that you can have deep relationships with others. And it's through those experiences and many, many more that, I've realized, like, for me, the truth is, like, I am the spiritual being having a human experience. I am here to use my voice, and I am here to create platforms of expression, of truth seeking, and of wisdom. And so I feel very, like, much in my core that I've found my truth, but I also think that when you are a truth seeker, you're curious and you stay open to new things that are going to be presented along the way too. So, like, I'm clear and I'm also, like, I'm open to whatever comes next. So
There's always more, right? There's
yeah.
always more to be found. And yeah, sometimes we kind of lost the memories from childhood. They're just kind of faded away. And then all of a sudden something happened and you're like, oh, remember I used to love that thing. And yeah, that's kind of the discovery of the truth.
For me lately, that just one example of that has been dance. Like, I look at this picture of this girl who clearly liked dance, like, I mean, ballerina slippers on the sweatshirt. But then I started playing very competitive soccer, and, like, that really was my life for like 20 years. And it's so funny now as I get closer to the truth, like, oh yeah, I'm out at dance class right now, like adult dance class. And I'm like, oh, there's that piece of me that, like, just wants to be expressed through movement, which is just so fun.
And it's so interesting because isn't it often the right brain things that we find are back to, because those were usually kind of erased or pushed back during the school and academic years, because everything was focused on the doing, the achieving, where a lot of the joy actually comes from the other things, the other activities. And they, unfortunately, also in our society, they just kind of go on the back burner, and it's almost like you have to relearn them. You eventually say, well, what is my truth? And so you have to relearn them and say, yeah, maybe it wasn't soccer, or soccer was good for a while, but actually the expression of dancing is much more who I really was and I am.
And there's something too, where it's like, of course, I don't regret any of that journey, and I do think there is so much truth when it comes to critical thinking and being objective, and, like, the things that you learn that are more logical and left brain throughout those formative years. But I really feel like even the term soul excellence of my company, or what I see out in the world today, is like, how do we marry these things? How do we infuse that, like, soul? But the excellence piece to me is still being open to growth. I want to say, like, it's not perfection. It truly is growth. And maybe to the topic of today's conversation, like, depth.
Yeah, I love that. Let's spend some time on the word truth, because when I was preparing for this episode, I was like, yeah, what does truth really mean? And often it helps us to kind of use the opposite and look at that and say, well, what is, the opposite of truth? Is that a lie? Is that, and then it made me think, well, is it always a lie, or could it also be something else? And so I was just curious how, you define truth and how you see the opposite, and kind of, like, just in general, what this word means to the times that we live in, probably.
Yeah, it's so interesting because we are living in a world where people are using the term personal truth, and I feel like using it sometimes as a way to disregard some things that may be more universal. So what I mean by that is kind of using their story as the only interpretation of what's going on, versus realizing that there may be many, many perspectives. So the opposite of truth being a lie, you're right. I'm like, is that true? Because as I was reflecting on this question, like, the words that came to me were more like illusion, distortion, hyperbole, exaggeration. Like, these are the things that I feel like are more the opposite of truth. Like when we allow ourselves to get trapped in a way of thinking that has us on a program versus this expansive, curious place. So really, I've been thinking a lot about this as I was doing this intimacy coaching program over the summer, and realizing that one of my limiting focuses, or the thing that like I go to when I'm in relationship, is this feeling that like my feelings and desires don't matter.
Mm.
And so whether or not that's true, like I know that it's a trigger and that's where I go. And when I do that, like my world gets super, super small and I'm not even open to the truth. And what I realized through that is like, there might be a piece of that that's true, but it's not the whole truth. Like it is a distortion. It is taking, I don't know the right metaphor, but it's closing the aperture and like only seeing this slice and assuming that that's all there is.
Right.
And so I don't have a great answer of like, what is the truth? But I do feel like when we give ourselves space and are not just in like a stimulus reaction mode, and we're able to pause, observe, like sense everything in our body, we're able to actually feel the truth more than just logically deduce it, or, from something that's being shared. So yeah, I would say looking at illusion as the opposite it might be a good starting place, and something I want to consider more too after this conversation.
Yeah. And I didn't have an answer when I came up with this question, right? But it kind of my thinking went along the same lines. It's like, it's not that, what we're seeing in the marketing and business world is like just blunt lies, but it's more like hiding the truth.
I mean, you just made me think more of like, for our times right now, like even COVID related statistics, it's like really choosing what you're showing people or not showing people, how you're sharing information, not sharing it, like what you're choosing to focus on. So back to the distortion or the limiting focus. And there is some sort of intent, right? It's almost like we see a lot right now in business and marketing is like the outcome is predetermined. Like, this is what I want. Therefore, I know that this is what I need to share or to show. And like, it's not all the truth. It's a piece of it. It's a part, it's a distortion of a stat that gets you there. And so I do wonder, like, what would the inverse look like if you started with truth, and I would dare say like some objective reality, because I do think like we can observe, we can sense different things, but let's just take out our evaluation and emotion out of it and say, a camera recorded this, like just tell me the actions that happen without the story. Because we're also seeing that too, right? Like in journalism, of course, which leads to publishing, is like the narratives are already set. And so the journalists are just slotting in stories to fit those narratives. And what I really like pains me about that is like, the world is so much more interesting, just like as it is, without forcing story to happen, or without saying like, this is the narrative. So I could go off on a whole tangent on that, but
it's so true. And it's like you can choose what you shine the spotlight on, and that might be a small piece of truth in a much bigger story, right? And so if you do that in marketing or sales, for example, yes, there's some truth to that. But if you're not giving the big picture, the real picture, then are you really still telling the truth? What comes to mind is like programs where they tell you that you can get this and this and this outcome, which happens to some people. But what they maybe don't tell you is that this person actually had one-on-one coaching, and they had a personal trainer, and they were like doing things very differently than the person who just sees these online videos. Yeah. So yes, it's the truth. Yes, this person got this outcome, but you're hiding some of the truth. So yeah.
And your example right there, it made me think of something that you and I talked about, of like, we don't want to be the gurus, you and I, as leaders of our companies. Like, we want to be the facilitators, the co-creators, the collaborators. And I think like honesty around that too, of like the work that needs to happen in a program, or like what it really takes. Like, I don't feel like we should be afraid to share that. And that would also attract people who like, they're really there for it, you know, and they're not just looking for a superficial solution or connection or something like that.
Yeah, they don't just buy the quick fix out of fear because they have to have the latest.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yet in a circle or in a society where unfortunately the belief is that if you tell them the whole truth, you tell them that it takes work, the belief is that, well, you're not going to sell because people are like, that's way too hard, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
So that's always the juggle, right? It's like, well, what do I do in this case? How far do I take the truth, empower my client, or where do I stop and say, look, I know I can help you. I'd really like you to make this decision. And yes, it's going to take work, but I hope you're ready for it. It's a tough
Yeah,
one.
I love the mantra, you know, one of my business coaches just always shares, which is, you know, this is simple, but not easy. And I feel like that's a very true statement where so many of the things that we want in our lives or that people pay for, like the result that they desire, there's probably a simple process, but it's actually following the process and having the dedication and the commitment and the humility and the mindset. Like it's not easy. It really isn't.
Yeah.
But more and more people are focused on, cool, is it worth it? Is it meaningful? Is it fulfilling? Like, does this fuel me in a way from the inside? And I think like you, I mean, those are the people that I am marketing to, selling to, connecting with, are those who like truth, who like meaning, who like fulfillment, and they are willing to put in the work. And it may not be everyone, but that's okay. You don't need everyone to support you, to buy your thing, to join your thing. Like that's the beauty too of being online, is you really can call in those that are meant for you.
Yeah. So you have a publishing company called Soul Excellence and work with soulful leaders, right? So what do you, what's your role? How do you see your vision to help them basically bring more truth to their business? Because essentially that's what I think that's how we see leaders nowadays. It's like, well, you have an impact. And so that's what you help them with. So tell us about your leaders. And
yeah, I mean, I really feel that, you know, I was reflecting, like the truth has never been that popular. Like I had to remind myself, like Jesus was crucified. Like people, I think sometimes really don't want to hear the truth. And in our society today too, like people are rewarded for hot takes, for instant opinions. And that means that truth seekers, who I believe are more kind of open-hearted, they have a lot of self-trust, so they're not swayed too much by what's going on. They are curious, and they can live in this place of groundedness, but also perspective. Like they're willing to hear and receive and adapt over time. And so those people don't get a lot of attention today because they're not inflammatory. They're not stoking fear. They're not doing the things that are getting the attention in the world right now. And so for me with Soul Excellence Publishing, you know, my role is at least twofold, and maybe threefold by the time I share this. But first and foremost, it is to exemplify what I stand for. And that actually means being willing to express, being willing to share perspective, being willing to ask questions, and being willing to continue to go on a growth journey, but also realize like, I'm not waiting till I'm 90 to suddenly be enlightened. Like all of this can happen moment by moment. Mm-hmm. And so part of my role is to simply be that. You know, I have a creator personality. I like to write. I like to communicate. And so I get to show other leaders what that looks like and how they don't have to just conform to the narrative. There's a lot about me and my story and experience that is surprising and unexpected when people learn of it. And so that's kind of what I wanted to show leaders. And then
that's interesting. If I can just jump in there. So you lead with vulnerability so that they can kind of learn from that and say, oh, I guess it's okay. And then, bring more of that also to their leadership.
And I see this in, one of the services I offer are multi-author books, where I bring leaders together to each write chapters in books. And inevitably on our first group call and on their first drafts, like I can really sense the walls that each author or leader turned author has put up of like, okay, I have an SVP title. I know I need to look a certain way. I know I have to like couch my words. And I see that and I sense that. And so I have to be the one willing to step out first and share, vulnerably on our calls about things going on in my life or the experience I had that led me to want to write this book too. Like I have to be that person. And then I see how they're like, okay, like that feels right to me too. And I actually didn't want to be this person who's just using the buzzwords and the bullet points and being the leader that they think they have to be. So yeah. So
I still wish you were around when you were around, but we just hadn't crossed paths yet when I wrote my first book, because I felt like, it was scary to all my stories in that book and say, but at the same time, I knew I was not going to write just any business book that sounded like a business book. I'm like, if I want my people to bring more of them into their marketing, well, there needs to be all of me in that book. But if you don't have, the community or you as the publisher telling you it's okay, that's what people want. Like the only book I've ever seen it in a business book is Brené Brown's, and even Brené only in her later books. Even in the early books, she was still kind of like how people wanted her to be, I think.
Yeah. And I have all of Brené Brown's books on the shelf in my library here. And I'm working with one solo author right now, Sasha Stair, who's writing about the inside job and conscious leadership. And I was really thinking the other day that to me, she is a Brené Brown, but one who has been in the trenches within corporate. The beauty of Brené is she's been researching and connecting and learning from so many people and now applying that to corporate. Mm-hmm. And so I'm really working with a lot of people who like, they're in corporate right now. Like they have the scars, they deal with the politics, they fire, they hire, all of that. And also they're using all of these principles to be better leaders, because it's not easy, because you are often swimming upstream and going against the grain and being the one to be like, all right, I must be in the wrong here because no one else is following this path.
Yeah.
And just the one other thing I'd say to that is, so I have to embody it. And I feel like in some ways I do that well, but also feel like that next like version or like inner desire is coming up right now of like, there's even more to express. And then the second thing really is to help my authors, like, is to look at them with what my other mentor would call God goggles, and to not attach too much to their story either, and just help them also not write from this place of a victim mentality, because that's also quite popular in the culture today. Is no matter the level of success or privilege someone has, you also see that they're communicating this message of, and I also am a victim. And the leaders that I work with, they don't see themselves that way, but I do see that they see the pressure to like, be like, oh, and all these horrible things happen to me too, so I'm relatable just like you. And
I'm so glad you're bringing this up. Yeah. It's the vulnerability kind of overdose. Yeah.
Where it's distracting, it's not necessary. And I know that the view is like, it'll give you some sort of like points and some gain. But I just feel like true leaders, like they go through those experiences, but what they're able to share from them is like, they're not sharing when they're in it. Like they're not writing a book when they're in it. They may be taking notes and experiencing it, but their book is about the journey, the transformation. And they don't sit there and say, give me credit because I'm super successful, but also all of these other things.
Yeah. It's the old, hero's journey that everybody tells you that that's what you have to do because that's what sells. because who would want to buy a book from someone who hasn't made it yet, right? Well, I call BS on that, because that's when you see, vulnerability being misused, because it almost feels like people go back to just find some story that they, like you said, that they can tell, that then makes you, approachable, or feel like you're on the same level. But it's just old, that story, and it's been used too many times that makes you wonder if that's really the truth, right? Like, I've heard some podcasters, and who hasn't done it, like all these popular guru podcasters, they all came out with some kind of childhood story, and they're probably true, and it's sad that some of these things happen to them, but it's just like, it makes you think, is this really what you wanted to share, or are you sharing it because you know that this is what works now?
I feel like there's something more here that I want to reflect on too. It's like, I've really gotten the sense when I look around that there's, in the culture, there's like, people don't want the stories of like, that are aspirational and inspirational. It's almost like they want to be really attuned to the stories that are about hardship and, pain and suffering. And I just feel that, just personally, like, I've never been attracted to any of that. Even as I've experienced really, really difficult things, it's like, I want to see people succeeding and thriving and flourishing. And like, that's what excites me. And I know to get there, you go through all of these things, and we all do. But I don't know where I was going with that, except to say, like, I like people who are optimistic, I think, about the future.
Yeah. And I think the point you made earlier is like, you want people who share stories of the present, or, close future, not very distant future. And then it feels like they're sharing a victim story, really.
Yeah. All right, this has given me a lot to think about too, as I'm about to guide a new group of leaders in creating their books. So I feel like you just gave me a little insight of something that we could do to not linger on the past so much, and really stay in the like present, and some visioning for the future, which is what they all care about too, is like, I want to change the trajectory of the future through the power of my ideas, which I just love.
Yeah, that's awesome. I was going to ask about, marketing, but I feel like we that's all we've been doing, talking about marketing in, an extended way, because all of this truth telling obviously has to do with marketing. And so really, still, if I offer you the question, how can we be more truthful in marketing? Well, maybe you can just summarize what we already said, because a lot of things we already mentioned.
Yeah, I'll give you the entrepreneurial, like new entrepreneur perspective, because, as I was reading your book on your, new book on selling, or reflecting on our conversation, I'm like, okay, looking back, there are some ways in the last year where I do feel like I have maybe put more pressure on potential prospects than necessary, or tapped into more of the fear of missing out on an opportunity, things that didn't feel quite right at the time, but yet felt like, all right, new business, need revenue, like I felt that energy too. And I'm now coming to you today from a place of, when it comes to marketing, I think I've always been very truthful in my just sharing who I am and what this company is about. But the one thing I would add to everything that we've said is that there is a patience and a trust and a kind of timing thing that would really, really help, especially, solopreneurs or small business owners, where once you start shifting to like, you're playing the long game here. Like, if you've committed to a path of building an intentional business or following humane marketing, like, it's not something you're trying for a couple months and moving on. So when you can hold that long-term perspective and hold to your vision. I just think that allows you to be more present in the moment and therefore patient, and actually not over marketing and communicating, but being really just attuned to I used to be like, what am I being called to say? And I do that sometimes, but also like, what am I sensing that people need to hear? Like, where is the energy low? Where is just like, where do I see frustration among my author groups, and trusting that I'm noticing that for a reason, and also communicating from that place. So I think patience and trust are important on this path.
Yeah. And again, that requires more truth from the entrepreneurial community who has been in business for many years, and who actually, because all the messages we hear is, you're not successful unless you have a 6-figure business, right? And so we keep going back to comparing ourselves to that. And so clearly it's stressful, because you feel like, well, I'm still not there yet. I'm in year 3 and I'm still not making the 100K, or never mind, 900K. So I think it also takes entrepreneurs to step up and say, it's a slower process. This takes patience. This takes building relationships. It doesn't have to take years and years, but yeah, it takes commitment, and maybe that's a bit slower. And then also truth about, how much money we're actually making. I remember back in the days in when Google Hangouts was a thing. So that was like 10 years ago.
Oh my gosh, I remember it well.
Yeah. I was like in these communities, and there was like these big gurus, you kept seeing them everywhere. And the belief was that these people were all doing really well for themselves, right? They were like pumping out content like crazy and everywhere on social media. Turned out that, a year after, they all had new jobs. So I was like, what happened there? And so it was like this misconception that we were just all feeding each other, saying, look, I'm doing really well, I'm putting out all these things. And so kind of saying, look, yeah, especially right now with COVID, things are kind of hard, yeah, there is not as much business than maybe 2 years ago. So I'm also showing up with more truth and telling entrepreneurs, especially the ones starting out, it's okay. It will take some time, and it's okay to not be making 100K in your first year.
Gosh, I mean, I just wrote down like a bunch of notes from what you were saying. Like, I believe that we are really focused on building profitable, sustainable businesses, and that especially, for me, like when you leave a corporate career and a career in tech startup technology that has nothing but like potential in it, and choose to make this shift to do what your heart desires, like I've gone on like the most expansive personal growth journey as a result of being in business, because all the little things, particularly around how you take care of your body, how your communication, your relationships, things that you could hide in a well-funded startup or a well-structured corporate, there's so much slack in all of these organizations. When it's you starting something, you don't have that luxury, and everything is exposed. So like, I wish entrepreneurs it's like, this is the gift of entrepreneurship, is going back into who am I, this topic of authenticity. What am I here for? Like beyond the revenue, beyond the relationship. So like, if you're game for that, then like, this is a great way to do that. And then it's so funny, since you and I last connected, I'm on a million different email lists, and it's like, I can't unsee the marketing tactics right now that are just like so jarring and so painful and so fear-based and so annoying right now, where I'm like, and I haven't unsubscribed yet because I'm just sort of observing right now of like, oh, this is interesting. And then, yeah, it's so funny. This like 6-figure business owner thing was not, being a new entrepreneur, it's not like a term I'd ever heard. And it coming from corporate, where it's like at a certain point you're in information services and consulting, like 6 figures is like the baseline, right? It was just so funny to me this last year where I didn't realize like, this is a benchmark, and then you're like, is it a benchmark? And I'm like, okay, who cares? Like, what are your expenses? What are you trying to accomplish? Like, your revenue is kind of irrelevant in when you look at it that way. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because I just was like, wait, why is this a thing?
Why is this a thing? Yeah, and you're so right. It's a benchmark. It's like, are you in the club or are you not in the club?
Yeah. And I want to know, like, yeah, what are your expenses? Where are you living? What was the purpose of your business to begin with? Like, are you growing? Is it an alignment? Like, oh, okay, like I'll be in your club if these things are true, Yeah.
Yeah. It's like comparing apples and pears. What if we are completely not the same, person? We don't have the same definition of success, and we live in different places.
Business models, different clients that we're serving. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as a publisher and writer, I'm sure you read a lot as well. So I'm really curious to hear about a business book that feels kind of true, or that you feel like has these qualities that we just described of a leader and writer who's authentic and true.
So it's funny, I was, reading your next book, and I was like, oh, I do love To Sell Is Human by Daniel Pink. And I haven't read it in a while, but I remember first being exposed to autonomy, mastery, and purpose whenever it first came out. And I was like, yeah, this makes total sense. And I was looking in my consulting career at the time being like, I don't feel like I had autonomy. I had mastery of like our research process, but like, I didn't feel like I had purpose in that. So I really appreciated that. But I thought about this question, and I'm realizing like my favorite business book is not a business book. And I brought it here. It's this one. It's called The Artist's Way. A Spiritual Path to Higher Creativity. And, if there are writers listening to this, I'm sure they've come across this book, but this book by Julia Cameron, like I really credit my whole business being based on working through her process of really kind of unbecoming and tapping back into who we are and our truth. And this book, I'm reading it now for the second time, following through on the exercises the second time. And in terms of forget like managing your team or figuring out which market to go to next or how to run a better product launch, like I'm all about starting with the leading of self. And this book is the one that's given me the most insight into who I truly am, what I truly desire, and also given me the courage to step out and be who I am, and like stop wearing the mask, stop hiding. So especially for leaders who like to write and reflect, like this is the book that I recommend to everyone.
Yeah, I love it. I have to read it a second time too, because I would say it's probably not just for readers. If I think about Daniel's quote about, why right brainers will rule the future from A Whole New Mind, that book, something about, how the future will be ruled by empathizers and meaning makers. And so The Artist's Way, that's who that is, right? Right brain thinkers. And that's a lot of what I bring into Humane Marketing as well. And in the free workshop that I run every 2 months, it's like, that's what we focus on. It's like, bring more creativity into your marketing, bring more beauty into your marketing. And that's the artist's way. So it's really, like you say, and you need to unlearn the current kind of left brain marketing. You need to bring, go back to your childhood really and bring more of that into it.
And you just made me realize, like, if I thinking about marketing right when I was leaving tech, is like marketing was becoming so automated. Okay, it's just a simple system. It's just numbers. It's just, follow this formula and you'll get new users, new buyers, whatever. And I just feel like the focusing on beauty, on elegance, on connection, on community, like this is what we're all craving. And you just feel when you're like a number in a system versus a person being related to or related with. So
totally.
Yeah, this is the path. And it's great that there are people like you and me like out there. I think because we're it's hard being at the beginning of something too, but you just trust that it's right. And
Yeah.
we'll see
And
what
I love
happens.
how you say the beginning, because I think you didn't just mean the beginning of your entrepreneurial journey. I feel that you also said the beginning of something new, the beginning of a new way to do business, where that's what matters. And that's why we're doing this work, really, right? It's like, let us help you lead the way to a new way of doing business and showing up differently.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just integrity and like the virtues for me right now of trust, commitment, mindfulness, and openness. Like this is really what I'm cultivating because I feel called to, but I also feel called to really embody that for others too, because I know people deep down want those things too, to trust themselves, to commit to the standards that they actually hold, to be authentic, which means in each and every moment, am I living in alignment with my values, to be open to new ideas? Like I trust that people actually crave these things too. And so when they're ready for it, I'll be like, I'll have been on this journey and I can share and we'll connect and we'll shine the way for others too.
Yeah. So why don't you, I think that's a good segue to sharing where people can find you and connect with you.
Yeah, there's two places. So KayleighO'Keefe.com, and Kayleigh spelled the Gaelic way, Kayleigh, or Soul Excellence Publishing. And that's where all of our multi-author books and our solo authors can be found. And if you want to write your book, that's a good place to start. And then you can find me on LinkedIn and Instagram and a few other places.
Wonderful. I always ask one last question, Kayleigh, and that's, what are you grateful for today or this week?
Oh my gosh, I have such a long list this week, but just to keep it for today, like I am grateful for lower humidity in the air. Like it feels so good out here in South Florida. I'm grateful for my barista, Jamar at Wells Coffee, who just like knows my order, is so kind to me when I showed up at 7 a.m. this morning, like, second in line. It's a loyal following, like 7 o'clock, and I was not the first person. And then I'm really just grateful for our next book, The X Factor. I just recorded a launch video and to prepare my authors and kind of let them know what to expect. And in recording that video, like I just felt this wave of emotion of like the nervousness shifting to excitement. And I'm like, I had some doubt. I'm like, am I going to make the shift this time around? Like I'm feeling more nervous than anything. And so the act of like expressing and sharing that I was feeling that way and then what to expect totally transformed that. So I'm really grateful for that. And that's just in the last couple of hours. So
Awesome. That's wonderful. We'll make sure to add that book in the show notes as well. I think.
Oh, please. Yeah.
Out by then.
It's going to be so good. Like now I'm like, wait, no, this is going to be amazing. Like I feel that now. It's so good.
Wonderful. That has been an absolute delight to talk to you, Kayleigh. We need to do it again. We need to come up with another excuse. We have no more podcasts, but we'll come up with another excuse.
Yeah. Yeah, this
So
has been so fun,
you.
Sarah. So absolutely grateful for you and for this time.
Thank you. Thanks so much for watching and being part of a generation of marketers who cares for yourself, for your clients, and for the planet. We really are change makers before we are marketers. So go ahead, be the change you want to see in the world. And I hope to see you again next week. Take care.